locked, tortured, and slaughtered. The victims of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng never stood a chance when they entered their hidden horror bunker. But how did they end up there in the first place? Beneath the tranquil forests of the Sierra Nevada mountains lies a dark and sinister history. The story of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, two twisted minds united in their obsession with torture and murder. Their hidden bunker became a dungeon of unspeakable horrors where women, men, and children were tortured, assaulted, and killed in the most gruesome ways. You might have watched the documentary Manifesto of a Serial Killer. This is the real story, with things the documentary didn't show. Welcome to Crime Site. Trigger warning: mentions of sexual assault, murder, and torture. Meet the killers. Here's the twisted tale of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. You might have heard of their story from the documentary Manifesto of a Serial Killer, but it's much worse than that. They were two ex-Marines with extreme right-wing beliefs and a penchant for living off the grid. These guys were much more than just your run-of-the-mill survivalists. No, they were bona fide sociopaths, quite possibly psychopaths too. The story starts with Leonard Lake's disturbing desire to create the perfect woman, a completely submissive, off-the-shelf lover that he could mold to his every whim. Now, if that isn't a red flag, we don't know what is. But for some reason, when he shared this idea with Charles Ng, the two of them bonded over it. Yeah, you heard that right. They bonded over their misogynistic fantasies. They were willing to go to any lengths to get what they wanted, and what they wanted was to abduct people, bring them to a bunker they had built in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and torture and kill them. That's right, folks. Lake and Ng had constructed a full-blown torture chamber, complete with soundproofed rooms, restraints, and all manner of torture devices. And they didn't discriminate when it came to their victims. Men, women, and even children were fair game. But here's where things get even more disturbing. Leonard Lake and Charles Ng weren't just sadistic killers. They were meticulous record keepers, too. They kept written and video logs of everything they did to their victims. It's almost as if they wanted to be caught, or maybe they just wanted to relive the horrors they had inflicted. And yet, despite all this, the story of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng has somehow flown under the radar for many true crime enthusiasts. Maybe it's because their crimes happened before the era of social media and 24/7 news coverage, or maybe it's because people simply can't bear to think about the depravity of it all. But one thing's for sure, this is a story that will chill you to the bone. Now, before we get into the full story, make sure you subscribe to our channel, because you don't want to miss all the shocking crime stories we upload weekly. The execution of the plan. So, they set out to find a remote location where they could build their torture bunker, and after stealing cars, identities, and property, they finally found the perfect spot, deep in the Sierra Nevadas, about 150 miles outside of San Francisco. But let us tell you, stealing wasn't just a one-time thing for these guys. They made a habit of it. They even killed people who looked like them and buried their bodies in shallow graves. Lake even killed his own brother and best man. They then took their IDs and information to assume their identities. It was all part of their plan to defraud others of money and loans. Once they had the cash, equipment, and property, they began meticulously building their underground bunker. They wanted to make sure that their victims had no way of escaping. And let me tell you, this bunker was no ordinary one. It was designed specifically for torture, isolation, and captivity. There was even a bed for all the non-consensual sex. Yeah, these guys were twisted. But wait, there's more. They called their plan Project Miranda. And, just like in Shakespeare's play, Miranda was the name they gave all women. They would lure their victims by posing as a photographer and offering a remote location for a photo shoot. And when the women arrived, they killed everyone except Miranda. And here's the kicker. Most of these women didn't arrive alone. They would come with friends, family, and even children. Ng and Lake didn't care. They killed anyone who got in their way. They wanted to completely break these women until they essentially became their sex robots, and nothing was going to stop them from fulfilling their twisted fantasies. The horrific acts. The crimes committed by Leonard Lake and Charles Ng are difficult to describe without being disturbing and shocking. They abducted and killed innocent people, including men, women, and children, for their own sick and twisted desires. Their actions were truly horrific and have left a lasting impact on the families and loved ones of the victims. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of their crimes is the sheer brutality and senselessness of it all. Lake once took a woman's baby and killed it in front of her, twisting the infant's neck until it was nearly decapitated. This is an unspeakable act of violence that no one, let alone any parent, should ever have to witness. And it wasn't just babies that suffered at the hands of these two monsters. Ng once cooked a child in front of their family in a wok, leaving a lasting trauma on the family that can never be fully healed. But it wasn't just the physical violence that made their crime so devastating. The psychological torture and sexual violence that the victims endured for days on end is simply unimaginable. Once they were done torturing and killing Miranda's loved ones, they did the worst to Miranda. The Mirandas that they abducted were subjected to unimaginable horrors. They would sexually assault and torture the girls for days on end before eventually killing them for a stupid reason. For what? Simply to satisfy the twisted desires of these two men. It's important to remember that the victims of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were real people with families and loved ones who cared for them deeply. Their lives were cut short in a senseless and brutal way, leaving a permanent hole in the hearts of those who knew them. The impact of these crimes will be felt for generations to come, and it serves as a reminder of the darkest side of humanity. The aftermath. The horror of Ng and Lake's actions continued for a year without anyone catching even a hint of their twisted deeds. Lake and his wife even filmed themselves acting out their sadistic fantasies and distributed the footage to their swinger groups. It's difficult to imagine how they were able to keep such monstrous activities hidden for so long while causing so much pain and suffering. Eventually, Ng was caught stealing supplies from a hardware store, and his violent response to being apprehended escalated the case. In an attempt to avoid responsibility, Ng quickly snitched on Lake and claimed that he had acted alone. All the diaries and videos they had kept as twisted trophies were ultimately useless, a waste of all the meticulous records they had kept. Ng and Lake were taken into custody, and although barrels filled with journals and videos were discovered, there was no actual evidence of the murders until a canine approached with a human spine in its mouth. Eventually, 11 bodies were found, along with 40 pounds of ash and bone dust. The diaries and videos revealed the gruesome details of how they tortured, assaulted, and killed 25 people in their bunker. But somehow they escaped justice. Lake had a cyanide capsule hidden on him and took his own life at the station before he could be interviewed. Ng, on the other hand, has remained silent and never admitted to guilt. He remains imprisoned in California to this day. Lake's wife, who was often present during the torture sessions and helped distribute their twisted pornographic videos, was never charged with anything. The authorities even let her clean up before executing the warrant, raising questions about how much evidence was lost. The story of Ng and Lake is a heartbreaking one, filled with senseless violence and depravity. The fact that some of their victims' families may never get full closure is deeply unsatisfying and serves as a reminder of the devastating impact that such acts of violence can have on countless lives. This must be one of the most horrific stories ever, don't you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the video on the right of your screen.